and welcome to the session, if not the room. I'm Joanna Grigg, and this is my colleague Diane, and we'll introduce ourselves in a moment. And our presentation is on creativity and daydreaming in practice, which again we will explain to you in a little while. Perhaps Diane, you'd like to introduce yourself first?
Yes, I'm Diane Simpson-Little, and I'm a lecturer at Sussex University and a course convener for the BSc in product design. I teach visual communication, sketching and design, toy and game design, and design philosophy.
And as I said, I'm Joanna Grigg. I have many hats. I'm a portfolio worker. I also work at the University of Sussex, but with my today's hat, I'm an author. I have 13 published books, and a poet. I publish my poetry as well, and I facilitate creative methods in workshops with creatives, amongst other things. So we'll set off on a little journey now. We'd like to ask you to imagine you're on a train, perhaps your train here today, although it may not look like that, and that you're on a long journey, perhaps it's going to take all day, and you're just gazing out of the window at the various views. Oh look, there's a nice red sports car, you know, in the way that you do on a journey. And you have brought some work with you, but your work's finished for the day, so you put that away, and you had some calls to make, and you've made your calls. Oh look, flooding, that looks familiar today. And you put your phone away, turned it off. You've had your lunch because you got a bit bored on your journey, and you're quite full, you probably ate too much, so you're quite sleepy, and you're gazing out of the window, and these ideas start coming to you. And because you're creative people, you have thought to put a notebook by yourself, pen and pad or your electronic notebook, and as these ideas come to you, you start to jot them down, and maybe you think, well, why is this happening? Why are these ideas coming to me when I'm not even asking for these ideas? And we all understand this process of daydreaming, and how when we're not actually asking for ideas to come to us, often our best ideas come. And what we're doing today is looking at how we can formalise that and make it into a creative process that we can all use. And that is another form of daydreaming that perhaps you might recognise, perhaps not that space, because that's me with the cat by the pond. And you see, it's a warm day, I'm comfortable, I've got books, I've been reading, I've got a glass of water, I've got a sleepy cat, and gazing at the newts and the frogs, and a wonderful scenario. And often we just go off into daydreams and we start to have ideas then. So what's happening? Well, we were talking about metaphor earlier in this session. If you think about the mind, the conscious and unconscious mind, and Freud formalised this with the metaphor of the iceberg. I'm sure you understand the basics of this already, that 10% of our mind, as in 10% of an iceberg, is conscious, is above the water, 90% perhaps the unconscious or the subconscious below the water, that we don't really know about day to day, and that we don't actively access. It's very difficult to access. And what we're doing with using creative visualization, that this is coming on to, and I'll explain in a moment, is trying to let ideas come up from below the water, from the unconscious, into our conscious mind so we can trap them. We're not talking about diving down into the unconscious, because that might be called therapy, and you might want to do that in a very controlled way if you want to do it at all. I don't want to do it at all. But we're facilitating a way for ideas to come up into the conscious mind. So what we're talking about today is a creative method called creative visualization, and you could call it a directed daydream using the conscious mind. So you set yourself up with a project perhaps, and you use your skills and you use your conscious mind to set up a scenario. You then allow the unconscious to come through with some ideas into that directed space, and then you come back to the conscious mind and you use all the skills to pull it together into something usable. And because, as you probably realise, if you're talking about creativity, we need to end up in something that has some value, not just a jumbled load of ideas. So that's what our presentation is about today, and I'll hand over to Diane, who's going to talk about her work in this area.
So within the Department of Engineering and Design at Sussex University, I've sort of developed a set of tools and exercises in the area of this visualization, or structured daydreaming, if you want to call it, to enhance the creative process and aid the process of design. Creativity is generally about making things visible, whether it's a painting, the design of a car, a poem, a book, a film, a theory, or an equation. But my interest actually starts at the beginning, in the concept stage. That's where my interest is, how we come up with the ideas and how we can approach creativity from a different perspective. So as well as focusing on the knowledge, research, theory, skills and problem solving, which are also really important, we can also develop our sense of self or our consciousness and work with our senses, our emotions and our intuition. It's often thought that the essence of creativity requires us to be awake, alert and present, so that enables us to deliberate on a particular problem, a theory. But intelligent thought and intuition does not always need our conscious attention. G. Walter and S. Marks, in their book Experiential Learning and Change, said people discover their deepest self and reveal their greatest creative powers at times when the psychic processes are most free from immediate involvement with the environment. And probably that's true, that I don't know how many of you, when you're suddenly asked a question, for instance, what's the name of that guy in that film? And you know who it is, you can see him in your head, but you just can't remember. And it's not until you sort of defocus and you go off to make a cup of coffee or go for a walk that immediately the name springs into your mind. So you're sort of defocusing and moving back. So when we daydream or use guided visualization, which is a more structured version of daydreaming, the brain becomes free to connect ideas, and this is where I wanted to tap into with my students at Sussex University. And David Lynch puts it, it's rather like diving within to catch ideas like fish. And because all the information that we take in on a daily basis first has to be digested in our subconscious before we can turn it back out into ideas. So, it's about having the ability to switch off, to slightly defocus, but still be alert, but sort of be aware and sensitive to what's on the inside. I think that we have this sort of resource within us, this deep connection, where we can really find ideas, and it can be used in conjunction with other methods, but as a method to help my students, in this case, come up with ideas. So I thought I would show you a case study of one of the ways, one of the toolkits I use with the students. I've got quite a lot, but this is just one example. So I'm going to show you the example of a seminar I run with my second year BSc honours students. And it's on a design module where I set them a project to, the brief is to design a lamp for a well-known designer. And they're all given a designer, quite a famous designer. So they go off and they do some research in this sort of format, and it's all put on the wall, and we all sort of have a bit of a discussion about it. So it's quite fresh in their minds. And then what I get them to do is that I need to calm them down. I find that we're all bombarded on a daily basis with so much visual stimuli. We have this internal chatter that goes on in our head, and students come in, they've been on their iPods, they've been, on their iPads, whatever, all this sort of stuff going on in their head. They're always thinking about what happened in the lecture before, what lecture they've got next, what they're going to do in that evening, and what deadlines they've got. So I try to calm them down and bring them back into the now. I want them to put all that away, and stop thinking about all of that. And with a simple relaxation technique, using breathing methods, I encourage them to relax, just as you relax on the train journey. And then, in this peaceful environment, I encourage the relaxed students, but the focused students, to close their eyes and then I take them on a structured daydream. So with the help of my instructional words, sound effects, sometimes I use sound effects, sometimes I don't, and music, it generally helps. They have to, first of all, with this experiment, this technique, they have to imagine that they are approaching the home of their chosen designer. So they approach the home, they walk into the house, and then I lead them from room to room. And I get them to really walk into the room, to look around the room, and to use all of their senses whilst they're in the rooms. So they first have to visualise it, and they have to, what does it feel like, what does it even smell like, how are they feeling while they're in that room. So they walk through different rooms, and then they have to choose a room in which they want to design their lamp for, and they have to choose the space in which they want to design their lamp for. And then they have to decide what sort of lamp they're going to be. And I get them to encourage them to imagine that they become the lamp, and they stand in the area in their minds of where the lamp is. So what sort of form they would take, what type of material they would be made of, what kind of light they emit, and their emotional characteristics. After that, I reground the students. I get them to open their eyes, but I want them to remain quiet and in their own individual state. And they're supplied with crayons, coloured markers and paper, and they have to draw or write the experience they just had. Not necessarily the lamp itself, but maybe shapes, colours, forms, or an essence of their thoughts. Then afterwards they're allowed to either continue to work alone or in separate small groups for discussion. But after each seminar, all the students generally agree that the process definitely enhanced their designs and made them focus on the overall personality of the lamp. So they have these discussion groups, and they have this piece of paper, and they have their written instructions to inspire them on the next stage of their design process. So there are two distinct strands that we found after this, and it's sort of enhancing their learning by encouraging intuitive design understanding and encouraging structured daydreaming as a creative technique. And it helps to motivate the students by encouraging self-directed learning. Just a bit of an anecdote, as I've been doing a degree show all last week, when I asked one of my final year students how he was inspired to design his hybrid wheel system for petrol or diesel cars, he exclaimed, well, now my exam's over, I can be honest and say that I came up with the idea when Top Gear was on the television in the background and I was daydreaming whilst looking out of the window. It's quite interesting the way he came up with the idea. So over to Jo.
Thank you. So I'm going to carry on with a little bit about my practice very quickly because we're going to run out of time in a minute. A few barriers and then where we're going from there. I've just put this slide up because we don't want to terrify people that you're going to go into some sort of trance like zombies. This is in a commercial setting at a conference where people simply closing their eyes and being led through a scenario like Diane was saying into a house in your imagination, whatever it is. Might use it for virtual focus groups in your mind, for branding exercises I've done in commercial settings, this sort of thing. Talk briefly about my work. I have done work in academic writing, so you might take students in their minds into a party and ask them to listen to the people at the party talking about their essay, their own essay, other people talking about their own essay. It's remarkable how people respond and what comes through. And but this is a solitary project of mine. I was doing some research in poetry, and I was rewriting, for reasons I will explain if you want to ask later, the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale in a feminist modern setting in poetry, okay? And to do that, I needed to get into Beauty's mindset. So to do that, I put myself into a creative visualization, or in the domain I work in poetry, we would call it a guided fantasy, but it's the same idea, and walk as the young beauty, the adolescent girl, walk in my mind up to the Beast's palace, and through the corridors into a writing room at the palace, to my desk in the palace, and write from her point of view. and I don't have time to read it to you now, but this, I do have copies if you want to look afterwards. It's a fairly dark poem, as you'd imagine, for this adolescent prison sex slave, really. And this was published in the Rialto, which is one of the UK's poetry magazines, alongside Caroline Duffy. So it has some worth, as valued by Margaret Bowden in her definition of creativity. And it's a technique that many writers understand, many practitioners, creative practitioners understand, getting into the zone, the creative zone. It's a way of doing it that works for some people. And again, coming back to a framework, perhaps, that we all need to develop creativity techniques that work for us if we're creative practitioners. We develop a creative, personal creative toolkit, and then if we get to a point where perhaps we're blocked creatively, we can go back to it. And I believe very strongly in formalising this in our own lives, in our creative lives. Oops, sorry, I missed the slide that said barriers. A couple of barriers here. This was some work I was doing in China with a group of Beijing students, postgraduate students, and probably more extreme in China, but people can be quite scornful about the process. You know, is it some sort of spirituality? Is it some sort of meditation? I don't want anything to do with it. And both Diane and I, in our practice, have discovered that by just letting people sit, say, okay, you don't have to do this, it's entirely up to you, and people will see the outputs from other practitioners in the group and think, oh, perhaps there's something in that. Another barrier we come across, as Diane alluded to, is relaxing people. If you're not relaxed, it's not going to work. So warm-ups, as in many scenarios. This is a warm-up of some students here. And in China, this is a warm-up called word ball. You might have done it where you lob the ball to each other and say related words. Get people in a really conducive mind frame for the exercise. And then, although it's an individual exercise, you may be working on a group project, so then you would get together, whether in commerce or in education, wherever it is, and pool your ideas as much as you feel able to towards the common aim of the project. So, to summarise, I'd like to put this back in context. I mentioned at the beginning about the conscious mind, then the unconscious process, then the conscious mind, and you can see that like a creative sandwich. So the slice of bread on the top is the skills and the conscious thought we put into it beforehand. The exciting, tasty filling is the creativity technique, in this case, creative visualization. But you could equally say TRIZ or morphological analysis or something else, as other presenters have been giving today. And then the second slice of bread to complete the sandwich is the skills you use afterwards to pull it back into some usable form. And we are setting up a collaborative project on this, so if you have interest in this area, we'd be very pleased to talk with you. Those are our contact details. We also have cards, and I have copies of that poem if you'd like to go into the dark minds of beauty and the beast. Thank you very much.